The air reeked of smoke, scorched earth, and something worse, ashes not from wood, but from what once held dreams. Sarah Grant stood barefoot in the soot where her schoolhouse used to be. Her knuckles were scraped, blood dried in thin lines across her wrists. One of her shoes was missing. She hadn't noticed until now. The fire had come fast. Too fast for it to be an accident. She held the only thing left untouched by the flames, her journal. The leather cover, worn soft from years of notes, lesson plans, and little sketches from her students, now bore smudges of soot and grief. She turned its pages with trembling fingers, half expecting them to crumble, like everything else had. Somewhere behind her, a door slammed. Laughter drifted up from a saloon, as if the fire hadn't taken a piece of her soul just hours ago. They had stood there, watched it burn. No one stopped them. Not the preacher, not the mayor, not the sheriff, who had once kissed her cheek and offered condolences after the funeral. They had called her uppity for teaching Cheyenne children alongside white ones. Godless, they whispered, as if literacy was a sin. She had taught anyway. She'd believed education might bridge something deeper than blood. But the fire said otherwise. Sarah walked back toward the graves, just beyond the town's edge. Wind blew dust through the twisted iron gate. The ground was still fresh atop Robert's resting place. Her husband had died just 3 weeks earlier, shot in the back while trying to break up a drunken brawl between settlers and Cheyenne traders. No arrests, no trial, just a pine box and an apology. She collapsed to her knees beside his grave and pressed her forehead to the name etched in cheap limestone. "I stayed, Rob," she whispered. "I stayed to finish the year like we said. I thought I could keep our promise." A tear darkened the dirt. The sun began to dip low, washing the plains in amber light. The prairie had a cruel way of making sorrow look beautiful. She didn't hear the footsteps behind her. "You still here, teacher?" The voice was coarse, with the arrogance of someone who'd never had to earn his place in the world. Sarah didn't move. She knew that voice. Mason Phelps, son of the mayor. His father had cut the school's funding after she refused to expel Cheyenne children. Mason had once left a dead rabbit on her porch. Now, his boots scuffed the grave beside her. "I warned you," he said. "Warned you what happens to women who step out of line." She turned her face up toward him slowly, hair falling across her eyes. "Is that what you call it? A warning?" He spat near her skirt. "Next time, it won't just be a building." He laughed, then walked off like a man who'd already forgotten the evil he'd done. Like she was just another rock in his path. Her fingers dug into the earth. Rage twisted in her gut, hot and pulsing. Sarah rose, every bone aching. She needed to leave. Now, before they tried to finish what they started. She went back to the house, small, lopsided, barely a home without Robert's boots by the door. She packed a small satchel with dried jerky, a flask of stale water, her journal, and the only thing Robert left behind that still held weight, his revolver. The revolver was heavy in her palm, colder than she remembered. She had always hated it, called it unnecessary. He had only smiled. "The West doesn't wait for reason," he'd told her once. "Sometimes it only listens to steel." She didn't sleep that night, just waited, eyes wide in the dark, until the morning light burned through the shutters like a silent alarm. By noon, she had vanished from the edge of town, riding out into the prairie on a half-lame mule borrowed from the stable under cover of dawn. The horizon stretched wide and merciless. No landmarks, no compass, just instinct. Days passed. Her water ran low. Her legs swelled from walking after the mule gave out. Coyotes howled some nights. She answered them with tears. Then came the storm. It rolled over the prairie like a black curtain, chasing wind and thunder in its wake. Sarah wrapped herself in a wool shawl and ducked beneath a dead cottonwood. Lightning lit the clouds like artillery fire. She felt like a ghost, huddled in dirt, shivering. When the rain came, it came angry. Her body ached from cold and bruises. She didn't even feel herself slipping into unconsciousness. Just darkness. Warm, final. She dreamed of children's laughter echoing off the chalkboard walls. A face hovered above her, brown skin, dark eyes, a feathered braid trailing over a buckskin shoulder. Then the dark again. The next time she woke, it was to the sound of firewood cracking, a steady beat of rain on leather above her. Her body was wrapped in pelts, and her leg, she could feel it now, throbbed in a dull rhythm. A man sat across from her, sharpening a long knife with slow, careful strokes. He looked up once, then back to his blade. She tried to speak. Nothing came. He stood, walked to a bowl, poured hot broth into a wooden ladle, and brought it to her lips. She drank, barely tasting it. Her throat burned. "Where?" she rasped. The man didn't answer, just placed the bowl in her hands and sat again. His presence filled the space without words. She saw now Cheyenne, a warrior, judging by the bone necklace and scars across his shoulder. He was calm, centered, but something fierce simmered just beneath his silence. She clutched the revolver under the blanket. He didn't react. He didn't need to. That frightened her more. On the third day, she could sit up. He still hadn't said a word. "Do you speak?" she asked, her voice raw. He looked at her, then nodded once. "What's your name?" Silence. Then Toma. She blinked. Toma. That was all he gave her. She looked around. The lodge was simple animal hides, a fire pit, herbs strung above the rafters, a woven mat beside the fire. Outside, the storm had passed. Birds chirped. The scent of pine filled the air. "You saved me," she said. Toma did not respond. Why? His eyes flicked to hers. Because no one else would. She swallowed hard. His voice was quiet, deep, final. "Did you know me?" "No." "Then why?" He stood and walked outside. The flap closed behind him. Sarah sat, stunned. The days that followed were slow, filled with quiet healing and awkward silences. Toma never hovered, never intruded. He taught her things without teaching. How to grind certain herbs for swelling, how to stretch her leg with a carved stick, how to sit without crying. She hated needing help, hated being weak. But something about his silence made her listen. She'd once spoken for a living. Now she had to learn another kind of language. On the seventh day, she asked, "Do you think I should go back?" He looked at her long, his jaw tight. "They tried to erase you. That's not an answer. It's truth." She thought of the fire, the grave. Mason spit in the dirt. She thought of the children. Sarah turned away from the firelight and stared out the open flap of the lodge. That night, she dreamed of hoofbeats and thunder. She woke with her hand on the revolver. Toma stood at the edge of the clearing, watching something. He turned slightly, just enough for her to see the knife already in his hand. Sarah rose slowly, her legs still aching, and stepped outside. In the distance, movement. Dust rising. Riders. They were coming. And they weren't looking to talk. Toma looked at her, face unreadable. "You need to choose," he said. Sarah nodded once. "I'm done running." And that was the moment she stopped being the widow teacher. She didn't know what she was becoming, but she was done watching her world burn without raising a single damn finger. Toma handed her the rifle. Thunder cracked in the sky again. Only this time, it wasn't weather. The morning broke cold and gray, a pale mist hanging low over the clearing where Toma's lodge stood. The air was thick with the scent of damp moss and pine smoke. Somewhere nearby, a bird called out in a shrill note that seemed to cut through the silence like a warning. Sarah sat alone just beyond the lodge flap, her hands wrapped tight around a cup of warm cedar tea. Her fingers still trembled, not from pain, though pain lived in every joint, but from the knowledge of what approached. She could feel it. The land held its breath. Toma moved through the trees like a shadow, gathering herbs with a knife that glinted each time sunlight breached the branches. He hadn't spoken more than a dozen words since the night he handed her the rifle. Yet she'd begun to understand his silences better than most men's speeches. He didn't ask her to stay. He hadn't asked her to fight. But he had stood beside her, and that was something sacred. Sarah hadn't fired the rifle yet. She'd held it, cleaned it, watched Toma reload it with the patience of a priest handling scripture. But the act of aiming, of taking a life, still clung to the edge of her mind like a nettle, waiting for her to grasp it fully. "You move quieter now," Toma said suddenly from behind her. She turned. "You mean I don't sound like a lost mule anymore?" He nodded once. "Less." It was the closest thing to a joke she'd heard from him. She cracked a smile and sipped her tea, the heat warming the ache in her chest. "You always live like this?" she asked, glancing at the neatly stacked firewood, the drying strips of venison, the woven traps lined by the trees. "This is not living," he said without looking up. "This is waiting." Waiting for what? Toma didn't answer. She studied him. Lean frame hardened by wind and sun, movements careful and deliberate. There was something haunted in his silence, but also something peaceful. Like he'd wrestled demons and made peace with their company. "I used to believe in second chances," she murmured. "Back when I thought people could be taught better. Now, I don't know." Toma didn't respond, but he paused, just long enough to make her words feel heard. That night, Sarah sat beside the fire, staring into its heart. Her journal rested in her lap, though she hadn't written in days. Words no longer came easy. They felt too soft, too polite for a world that spat on mercy and burned children's dreams in the name of tradition. She glanced at Toma. He was sitting cross-legged, hands resting on his thighs, gaze steady on the flames. She didn't know if he was praying or remembering. "Why did you leave your people?" she asked. His eyes flicked to hers. "I didn't. But you live alone." "I listen for their voice in quiet places." She tilted her head. "That's poetry." "No," he said. "That's grief." The fire popped sharply, sending a flare of sparks into the dark. Sarah looked down at her hands, chapped and calloused now. Her wedding band still clung to her finger like a memory, refusing to let go. "I buried him 3 weeks ago," she said softly. "He tried to protect the children, stood between them and the town council's men. They shot him in the back." Toma nodded slowly. "Some cowards wear badges." "I thought I could finish what we started," she whispered. "I thought if I stayed, taught just one more lesson, I'd be doing something good. But they burned it all." "You tried," he said. "That matters." Her throat tightened. She hated how much it mattered that he believed her. The days blurred after that. They trained in silence. He taught her how to move with the forest, how to avoid snapping twigs, how to spot snare tracks, how to listen with more than her ears. He made her learn the rhythm of her breath. She fired her first shot into a knotted tree trunk, hands shaking. "Not bad," he said. She laughed dryly. "You lie too well." Toma cracked a rare smile. "No, I lie with purpose." Their closeness grew like moss, slow, quiet, undeniable. She watched him as he worked, mending nets, fletching arrows, repairing his worn knife handle with sinew from a deer's leg. His hands were rough, but precise. She felt safer when they moved. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the pines, she found a carved pendant left beside her sleeping mat. A small wooden hawk. Simple. Elegant. She picked it up and stared at it. "Is this yours?" He didn't look up from the fire. "Yours now." She clutched it tight, something stirring deep in her chest. A quiet thread of warmth where cold had lived for so long. But peace never stayed long on the frontier. The next morning, a rider was spotted by the ridge. Toma saw him first, a white horse gleaming in the distance. Not Cheyenne, not a traveler. The silhouette bore the unmistakable shape of a scoped rifle strapped to the saddle. A scout. Sarah's pulse quickened. "Do you think he saw us?" Toma's eyes narrowed. He saw smoke. They doused the fire in seconds. Toma packed essential gear and handed Sarah a pouch of dried meat and water. He strapped on his bow, the quiver slung tight across his back. "We move," he said. They left the lodge behind. No time to mourn it, just as Sarah hadn't mourned the schoolhouse, or the house she once called home. They traveled deeper into the forest, where the canopy grew thick and the world turned green and whispering. Toma moved like a ghost. Sarah followed, breath shallow, body aching but alert. By dusk, they reached a narrow ledge overlooking a rocky ravine. Toma paused, crouched low. Sarah followed suit. Below, 2 riders moved slowly through the gorge, white men in trail-worn coats. Rifles ready. One of them wore a sheriff's star, half covered in mud. The other had a scar across his neck and fingers stained with tobacco. Sarah felt her blood chill. "That's Brackett," she said. "He ran the jail in town. Used to brag he could get a deer in under a minute." Toma didn't speak. His jaw tightened. They waited until the men passed, then doubled back and made camp beneath a bluff lit by the faintest thread of moonlight. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. "They're hunting me," she said, staring into the darkness. "Not for justice. For revenge. I humiliated them. They think I belong under a stone." Toma sat beside her, his shoulders barely brushing hers. "Then make them regret it." His words weren't cruel. They were calm, certain, like stone beneath river water. She turned to him, eyes shining with some emotion too complex to name. "How do you keep your anger from swallowing you?" He looked at her a long time. "You don't." A long pause stretched between them. Fireflies danced in the trees. The wind shifted, bringing the scent of wild sage. Then Sarah whispered, "I never thought I'd find someone who understood." "You didn't," Toma said, voice low. "You found someone who remembers." She reached out, fingers brushing the edge of his hand. He didn't move away. For a moment, the world stilled. Then the sharp snap of a branch. They were not alone. Toma was on his feet in a blink, bow drawn. Sarah grabbed the rifle and scrambled to her knees, pulse pounding. But it was not an enemy. A Cheyenne girl, barely 10, stepped from the woods, her braid damp from river mist, eyes wide with fear. "Toma," she said, panting. "They're coming. 5, maybe 6. They have torches." Sarah met Toma's eyes. "They followed us." Toma nodded once. "Then we stopped running." Sarah gripped the rifle tight. She was no longer just a widow. She was becoming something else. Something stronger. And in the firelight, with war closing in, she didn't feel fear. She felt ready. The torches came first, flickering yellow ghosts weaving through the blackened trees. Then the creak of saddles, the low drawl of hushed voices, and the distant cough of a rifle being readied. Sarah lay flat against the ground, heart drumming in her throat. Beside her, Toma didn't move. His breathing was even. One hand rested on his bow. The other pressed gently against her back, a silent signal. "Wait." Through the brush, she saw them. 5 men on horseback, rifles strapped across their backs, mouths full of chewing tobacco and bad intentions. They weren't bounty hunters. They were worse. Local men. Men who thought justice came on a horse and smelled like kerosene. "They've been here," one said. "Look at them prints." "Trail runs cold by the river," said another. "Best set a fire. Flush 'em out." Sarah's blood iced. Fire. Again. She looked at Toma. He gave a single shake of the head. "Not yet." The men split up, 2 heading uphill, the others moving toward the girl's trail. Sarah recognized one of them in the torchlight. Phelps, Mason's cousin. The same sneer. The same limp from a bar brawl gone wrong. She gritted her teeth. Toma pointed to a tree above and moved like wind, disappearing into the dark. Sarah waited 5 breaths, then 10. When she rose, her hands held the rifle steady. The girl, Nahi, was hidden under a rock overhang, eyes wide but unblinking. Sarah signaled her to stay quiet, then crept toward a small ridge where she could see everything. The men circling, the torchlight bouncing off leaves like fireflies trapped in glass. Then came the scream. One of the men stumbled backward from the brush, clutching his throat, gurgling. An arrow jutted from his neck, blood glistening. Gunfire erupted in a blind panic. Lead tore through trees. Bark exploded in chips. A second arrow hit another man in the chest, Toma's work. He was high in the branches, vanishing into shadow between each shot like a phantom. Sarah moved. Fast. She aimed for the man lighting a torch near the camp's edge. She inhaled, exhaled, and pulled the trigger. The sound cracked across the ravine like thunder. The man fell backward, torch sputtering in the mud. The others scattered. She caught one screaming for help, running straight into a thorn thicket. Another dove behind a boulder, firing blindly into the woods. That's when the wind turned. Smoke began to rise. Someone had already started a fire. not to flush them out, to burn it all again. Sarah ran, heart racing, limbs heavy. She followed the smoke, past the broken arrow shafts, past the dead men slumped against trees. She found the blaze licking up the side of a sapling, dry leaves crackling. A rag soaked in oil lay nearby. A matchbox, half spent. She stomped it out with her boots, coughing, eyes burning. Footsteps behind her. She spun with the rifle. It was Phelps. His gun already up. "I knew it," he spat. "Knew you were hiding out here like some prairie witch. Teaching savages. Bet him too now." Sarah didn't flinch. She didn't lower her rifle either. Phelps laughed. "You ain't got it in you." She thought of the classroom, of the children's books turned to ash, of Robert's grave, of the screaming when the first fire took everything. Then she pulled the trigger. His body dropped in the leaves like a sack of grain. Silence followed, deep and deafening. Toma stepped into the clearing behind her. His expression was unreadable. He would have killed us," she said, chest heaving. Toma only nodded. "You did what had to be done." Her fingers loosened. The rifle lowered. They burned the bodies that night. Not out of cruelty, but out of necessity. The prairie didn't care for corpses. Scavengers came fast. And besides, these men had brought fire. It was only fair they left in flame. The girl, Nahi, helped gather wood. Her face was expressionless, but her hands shook when she handed Sarah a log. They stood side by side as the pyres burned, smoke curling up into the stars. Later, as dawn broke in streaks of red and gold, Toma sat beside her near the ravine. "You are not the same woman who arrived in the rain," he said. "No," she whispered. "That woman died in the dirt." Toma looked at her, eyes like obsidian. "And the one who rose?" She was quiet a long time. Then, "She remembers everything. But she doesn't beg anymore." The air shifted. A quiet strength passed between them. But there was still more to do. They couldn't stay hidden forever. The attacks wouldn't stop. Not until someone made a statement loud enough to be remembered. Sarah turned to Toma. "I want to teach again." He arched a brow. "Not here," she said. "Back at the burn school. In the open. No hiding. They will come." "I know." He didn't argue. Instead, he said, "Then we make ready." And for the first time since Robert's death, since the flames swallowed her old life, Sarah felt the ground beneath her steady again. She had fought. She had bled. And now she would rebuild. The sun rose golden over the wide sweep of prairie, its light sliding across dew-covered grass like the breath of something ancient and watchful. Sarah stood near the river's edge, boots sunk into the muddy bank, the hem of her skirt damp and stained with ash and earth. She watched the water flow, calm, steady, relentless, like time itself. Behind her, voices murmured in half-whispers. Children, mostly. A few mothers. 2 old men with hands like knotted rope. They sat beneath a cottonwood where her chalkboard now leaned against the trunk, its edges scorched but intact. The schoolhouse was gone, burned, like everything else she'd once called hers. But the idea of it had survived. She wore a simple dress. No bonnet. Her rifle lay propped against a stump nearby, a warning dressed as a tool. The children watched her like they didn't know whether to laugh or cry, their little fingers curled around sticks and books and scraps of slate. "Today," she said, her voice clear, steady, "we learn beneath the sky. Because the truth doesn't burn so easy." They blinked. One of the boys grinned. She smiled back. It wasn't wide or easy, but it was real. The town was still there, just over the ridge. Its silence had grown louder in the past week. The fire, the gunshots, the dead men. No one came to investigate. No one dared. Not after what Toma left hanging from the old well post. Phelps's badge nailed through a blood-stained kerchief, a single arrow beside it. A message. One the wind had surely carried into every saloon and council hall. The widow wasn't alone anymore. Toma stood a few paces away, arms folded, watching the ridgeline like a hawk. He hadn't spoken much in the past few days, not with words. But his presence had changed. Less guarded. Still stone, but warmer now, with edges worn smooth by shared fire and blood. Sarah handed out books with a quiet reverence. like returning something sacred. Some children wrote in broken English. Others scratched syllables in Cheyenne. She taught both. She insisted on it. The world, after all, would never heal if its children couldn't read each other's names. By midday, the air turned restless. Toma moved first. He tilted his head toward the hilltop. Riders. 6. No torches this time. No bounty hunter sneers. Lawmen. And Mason Phelps's father, the mayor himself, at the front, wearing a clean coat and a face like soured milk. They rode slow, cautious, like men approaching something wild they once caged but no longer understood. Sarah didn't stop teaching. She kept her eyes on the page, her voice calm, the children's gazes flicking between her and the approaching dust cloud. Then a cough behind her. She turned. The mayor dismounted, boots heavy in the grass. His hat stayed on, out of disrespect or fear, she couldn't tell. "You're trespassing," he said flatly. She tilted her head. "On what?" "This land belongs to the town. This land belongs to the river, to the sky. I'm just borrowing a little space beneath both." The lawman beside him shifted. His hand rested on his belt. "You've made a mess, Miss Grant," the mayor growled. "Harboring natives. Teaching lies. Killing a town official." She stepped forward, voice cold. Phelps lit the fire. He aimed his gun. "I ended it. That's not murder. That's math. You'll stand trial." "No," Toma said suddenly, stepping beside her, voice low and even. "She won't." The rifles lifted. Toma didn't flinch. Behind him, 4 more Cheyenne riders appeared from the tree line, silent as dusk. All armed. All ready. The mayor looked around. Pale now. "I have authority," he said. "No," Sarah said. "You had it. When you let men burn a school. When you let children cry behind barred doors. When you looked at me and saw weakness." A hush fell over the field. Even the river seemed to still. "I'm not weak anymore." She walked forward, eyes locked on his, until they stood a foot apart. "Tell your town," she said, voice low, "that I will teach here every day the sun rises. That if they burn my board, I'll write lessons in the dirt. That if they tear up the dirt, I'll carve words into stone. And if they kill me, someone else will take my place." The mayor stared, uncertain. Then, quietly, "You won't always have warriors at your back." Sarah glanced at Toma, then at the children watching from the tree. "No," she said, "but I'll always have the truth." He said nothing more, just turned, mounted his horse, and rode off. The others followed. Toma lowered his bow. The field exhaled. Sarah turned back to her students. "Page 20, she said. "We're learning about the constellations." That night, under a sky full of stars, Sarah sat by the riverbank with her journal open on her knees. The fire crackled beside her. Toma stood across from her, arms crossed, watching the water. "You never answered me," she said. "Back at the bluff." He looked at her. "Why did you save me?" He paused. "You were surrounded by ghosts," he said. "I thought you deserved one more chance to haunt them back." She smiled. "You always talk like a man out of legend." He sat beside her, quiet for a while. "You became the legend," he said. She closed her eyes and leaned her head on his shoulder. And in the space where grief once lived, something new began to bloom, soft as dawn, strong as stone. Some said the West was built by bullets and boots. But here, beneath the sky's wide mercy, it was a schoolteacher and a warrior who carved a different future. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments.